Hello guys, I'm Tony Lyons, and I'm going to try to wrap up this alpha section of the advanced keying breakdown. So, I'm going to be talking about channel math today, and what keying really is when it comes down to the alpha. So, in a general rule, I would say that if you can see it, you can key it. So, what I'm saying there is, if you can see the difference in the between some pixels, then you can key it. So here, obviously, it goes from green to yellow, or green to red, and you can see that. In this example, it goes from green to white, or green to orange, and we can see that the edge is there. We can see the edge. We know where it is. Same thing for any of these images. We know where the hair begins. We can see it. In an image like this, you can barely see where this stair meets this wall, so you probably would have a really difficult time keying that. However, you can see clearly that this white part of the dress is super contrasted with the background, so you'd be able to key that pretty easily. And so keying is all about contrast in the image. So if you can see it, you can usually key it because you can see where the area changes. If you can see the difference between what you're trying to key and the background, it signifies that there's a major area of contrast in one or more of the channels. And what I mean by that is the RGB channels. So if you're in your viewer and you just click R and G and B, you can switch between the channels. And we can see the green screen in this shot, for example. Now, if I'm in the red channel, it doesn't look like there's any contrast at all. Like, the screen looks the same color as the wall. If I go to the blue channel, it's the same thing. The screen, in this case, is a little darker than the wall. If I go to the green channel, now we see some contrast. Now we see a black and white image where the screen is white and the wall is dark. And that is where we're going to pull our key from. As in, that is the relationship between the red and green and the blue channel, and the contrast in each individual channel, is what keyers are actually using to combine and manipulate in order to pull your key. Now, luminance, if I click Y in the viewer, you get your luminance, and it's different. For example, if I go green to luminance, it's a little different. Luminance is just the channels multiplied with a certain number in an equation right here. So like red times 0.2126 plus green times 0.71 plus blue times 0.07. So what it's saying is, like, 21% of the red plus 71% of the green plus 7% of the blue. And you add all those together, and that black and white image equals luminance. So in this example, I've split out this thing into the channels, red, green, and blue. And notice how these are just black and white images. And when we're making our alpha, we want to end up with a black and white image. So in a sense, I could take this green channel, for instance, and I could put a grade, and I could just grade it. So now maybe I have a matte for my doorway here, and that's totally acceptable for matte. It's already there for you. It already exists. And so what I would recommend is, as soon as you get a shot, just flip through the channels and see which one has the most contrast, and that'll help you in knowing, where to start if you're going to approach this with channel math. And, channel math, it might not be something that you do for a green screen, for instance, because, that has keyers and stuff that you can just default to. But if you were going to go and key this red cloth, then maybe you would use this technique. So if I look, and I'm trying to look at this cloth, notice, so I'm in the red channel, and the cloth and the wall they're virtually the same color. There's absolutely no contrast really between the two. If I go to the blue channel, look at this. Now the wall and the cloth are contrast. You can see that the wall is white and the cloth is black. And there's even more contrast between the green channel and the red cloth and the wall and the green channel. And so again, you can make a separate grade for this. So now I take the wall about there. Now I have a mat for this cloth. I could crunch it a little bit more. So now I have a mat for this cloth that I could use. It's pretty rough, but you probably adjust it all you want. And so let me talk about Luminance for a second again. So what I was saying is, so I've split off these channels, and I'm grabbing a percentage of each channel. So I have red, and then I multiplied it by 0.2126, and then green multiplied by 0.7152, and blue multiplied by 0.0722. And so you can think of these as percentages of each channel. And why do we do this? Well, our eyes perceive luminance in a different way. It's not just all these channels added up. It is actually, our eyes are more perceptive to green, so that has a higher percentage, for instance, than blue does, and looks like we barely perceive blue at all when it comes to luminance. And red is, lower than green. So green is 70% about, red's about 20%, and blue looks like it's around 7%. So what you would do is you would take each of these images and plus them together, and now this is luminance. Now there are a couple ways of getting luminance in Nuke. When you desaturate an image, when you take this and you just desaturate it all the way down, you have now made luminance. So these two outputs are the same. And when you do a luminance key, that is also the same. So if I flip 1, 2, 3, these images are all the same. Bringing the saturation down takes into account those percentages. So you're essentially doing this little step here where you're multiplying the channels and then putting them together. So that being said, the luminance is derived from each of these three channels. So when you do a luma key, you should also consider doing an individual channel key, because maybe that'll give you a better result, because a luma was achieved by using those three channels and a percentage of them. So maybe instead of doing a luminance key, do a red channel key or a green or a blue channel key. And so when you add all the channels together, you get this image. And notice it's a lot different. It's a lot different than the luminance channel. So this is just red and green and blue plus together. And so now you see, maybe this would be a good example of grabbing the whites of her dress, or it's just giving more detail in areas. It's just a different result. So if I were to punch this, I might get more detail in areas that I would have lost if I did luminance, if I plus all the channels together. So I could probably grade it in order to make the same kind of image. But, yeah, it's just a different result. So consider, instead of using luminance, consider plussing all the channels together. And there's a great tool online in Wikipedia, I think it's also from the Luma Pictures, folder on Wikipedia, Lumen Pictures Tools, and it is this channel control. And I think I might have done a little like fussing with it, messing with it. So I'll post this version online, but essentially it is doing this little node setup here, and it gives you controls for each channel. So you select the channels, it's fine, RGB, and each of these sliders controls how much of the channels are going to get plussed in the operation. You can change it to screen if you want to, or just leave it on plus. But so if I didn't want any of the blue channel, I would slide it all the way down to 0. If I wanted 50% of the green, I would go down 50%. In fact, I could probably make luminance with this. Let's see, what was it? 20% and like 70% and 7%. That's not completely accurate, but let's see. It's probably pretty close. So, just to reiterate, that's how you make luminance. So, the point is, you could slide these guys around until you find, a good area. Maybe without one of these channels with green, for instance, maybe it's in the way, so you'd slide it all the way down and you'd be able to key something else. So that's a really good tool. I use this a lot for when I'm doing keys for things that is channel math based. And just talking about one other thing in the channel math section. So don't be afraid to, instead of plussing all the channels together, get a little creative. And one of known technique I've read about was called the After Effects matte technique. I think maybe it was first used in After Effects. That's why it's called that, perhaps. But so we get the red, green, and blue channel, and say we're using a green screen. Whatever screen color you're using, take that channel and invert it. So this is the inverse, and then you'd want to put a grade, and basically you'd want to take the black point and slide it up until the screen becomes black, and so I'll go to about right there. Plus that, or screen that with the red channel. In this case, I'm just going to screen it. So you're taking this image and screening them. So it's adding to all the places that are not the screen, because we've inverted the screen color, which should have the screen color be very close to white, or the brightest thing. So we've screened this, and then you take the other channel and you screen or plus that, so that fills in even more holes. And then you take all those things and you put a grade at the end and you crunch it down. So if I just put this to default, get rid of the whites, and then crunch it down, and essentially you have an alpha now. And so to reiterate, you take the screen color, invert it, grade it down so that the screen is now black. You plus that onto the red channel, and then you plus the opposite color of your screen color. If it's green, then it's blue, or if you're doing blue screen, then it would be green, and you plus that over red. And then you take an overall grade and crunch it until you get a black and white matte. And so you wouldn't want to do this every time. It's obviously a lot of nodes to set up for simple things. So I just made a quick gizmo where I've exposed a couple of these controls. So say I was doing this After Effects matte to this lady here. So this was the first black point of your screen color, and this was the overall black point. And you can choose whether or not you want to screen or plus the channels together. And I have another, a gamma control overall, and overall white point, so you can fill those holes in her body. So same thing with blue screen. You would just switch this thing to blue, from green to blue. And this works pretty well. I mean, you can definitely use this matte for keying. You can combine, say this was a really good key for this guy's suit of armor here. So you just drag this down. Oops. So say this was a decent key for his armor. I could use this now to roto it out and combine it with another key. Say I had a good key for this side of the screen and this guy was giving me problems, I could key that. One thing I'll say, let's go back to this lady here. So going through our channels, okay, red, look at red. No contrast at all. Well, you get some contrast over in this side where all the highlights over here are. Blue, same deal. The screen is basically black in the blue channel. There's no blue being contributed from the screen. But, as soon as I get to the green channel, now everything, this is what I would expect a key to look like. Because we're trying to get a black and white image and it's already there. So I could essentially make a black and white matte from my channel. So when I talk about channel math, what I mean is you're taking these black and white channels that exist and you're manipulating them, whether it be inverting them and plussing them, or crunching them with a key, or screening them together, maybe even multiplying them together, and you're using the advantage that these are already black and white images and using that advantage to make a black and white image for your matte. And what I was saying before is the more difference you can see in the colors, you know that there's going to be a channel there. In this case, it's the red and the green channel. They're very contrasted with the background. So this is going to be white and this is going to be black. And you're looking for that. That is what makes a good key. Now, this pole, for instance, the bottom of this pole with the blue screen, you can barely see a difference. There will be a difference. For instance, okay, the blue channel will contain the luminance value here, so it's going to be a little darker, but it's going to be super hard to key that if you want to keep this thing, because it's the same color. And you can tell it's the same color, you can just look at it and see, oh yeah, it's the same color. So what I'm getting at is just keep your eyes open. The more you can see it, the better off you can key it. And that goes for roto too. So if I said key that gun on her hip, you would tell me, well, no, it can't be keyed because it's not the same color. But you can visually see that. So that can help sometimes if you're determining whether you can key something or you can roto something. If I said key out these poles, you would tell me that's probably impossible, and I'd probably agree with you. To isolate just these poles with an alpha, because it blends so much with the background. But if I said key her hair, that's totally doable, because she has red hair and it's blue screen, so if I flip through the channels. So if I was trying to do that, I have the red channel, so shuffle out the red, and I have the blue channel, shuffle out the blue. So I could invert the blue, crunch it down, like so, and then I could plus these two together, or over, plus. So there, really quickly, I have a matte for her hair. And it's not the best matte, it's not the best footage either, but it's also not a bad matte. Could use it for just the hair. So don't be afraid to do that kind of channel math. It's even picking up some subtle details. Sometimes it will be the best way to keep things like reflections in windows, or wispy hair, or just one-off color stuff, like say this was against a different kind of background and I needed to isolate this brown saddle thing. maybe I could do some channel math and get that isolated for color corrections or what have you. So the last thing I'm going to talk to you about in this video is combining keys using a Keymix workflow. And in my opinion, this is the simplest and clearest way to combine keys. So say I had a key of this girl and I was using a prime mat and getting a good result for these side edges, and then I did say a key light, and in this case I like the hair from the key light. So I want to keep the edges from the first one and make a rotor shape around the hair and use the key light instead of the prime mat. So what can I do? Well, if you're not using the key light, the Keymix method, then you'd have to stencil out where the rotor shape is, and then you'd have to take this key light key and mask the same with the same rotor shape, and then you'd have to plus that area and essentially replace that area with that rotor shape. So it's a stencil mask technique. You stencil the first one, and you mask the second one, and then plus the masked version over the stenciled version in the same exact area. And it's depending on using the same rotor shape for both the stencil and the mask. So that's that works, but I think an easier way to work would be, say you have the same scenario. So I have a prime mat and the key light, and this time we're using a Keymix. And the Keymix asks for a B, an A, and a mask input, and it essentially says replace B with A wherever the mask is. So you just draw your rotor shape and plug the mask into the Keymix, and if I disable, you'll see it is essentially doing that stencil mask technique inside of one node. It's very clear to see. As soon as you see the Keymix, you know that it has a mask input and it needs to have one to work. So if you see this, you automatically look at the mask to figure out where the replacement has happened. So that is an easy way to work, and it solves a lot of the edge issues that you might get from using this technique with the mask and stencil. You might get a darker edge. For example, if I use an over instead of a plus, see, I get a dark edge along this girl because of the way that the math is working. So I would need to use a plus. So that is 3 merge nodes that need to happen with different operations in order to do the same job as a Keymix. So I think it's the cleanest way to work, and that's how I like to do it. I'm going to address one more thing in this video, and that's going to be masked post grading. So never be afraid to use a ramp or rotor shape and isolate an area to help crunch certain areas of the key. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you have a key light and I've sampled up near her hair, and that's giving me a pretty good result, but you can see there's a gradient where it's black and it goes towards gray. So what I could do is just make a ramp in 0 to 1 and use that ramp to adjust the black point and help crunch the key as it gets further. So I'm leaving that area that looked good alone, and I'm just using a ramp to crunch everything below that in a nice gradient. And don't be afraid to use rotor shapes either to get some fine detail. So if this area was bothering me, just crunch it a little more. And the point is, it's not you shouldn't think of it as an overall. Sometimes you'll have to do isolated patches. In this case, maybe I would make a couple more ramps to get rid of all this other stuff, or just mask it out. But never be afraid to take your key a little bit farther and just use some basic ramps. A lot of times you'll find these gradients in the green screen, so a ramp can be an easy way, especially on a locked off camera, to get rid of those and help out your overall matte.